Hello, everyone. Good morning. And just want to welcome you to today's webinar, How Colgate-Palmolive Works Cloud Exposure Magic with Wiz and CyCognito. My name is Caroline Goldsmith. Just before we begin, some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and we'll share the on-demand link afterwards so you can revisit or share it with your team. And we will reserve some time at the end to answer and respond to any questions that you have. So please feel free throughout the webinar to submit any questions in the Q&A section. And Alex, over to you.
Thanks very much, Caroline. I'm Alex Schuchman. I'm the CISO here at Colgate-Palmolive. I also own all of the global network operations and engineering, and I've been with Colgate for over 28 years now. So it's been quite a fun journey. What I wanted to take you guys through today is some interesting areas. If you go to the next slide, on how we're really dealing with some of the exposure management challenges. So, I think this is a really interesting area where a lot of CISOs and a lot of security practitioners try to build out a security program to cover all of the assets they're aware of. And that's really the scope of what they do, either from an exposure or vulnerability management program. What's really one of the biggest challenges is understanding that that may not always cover all of the assets that your company is responsible for. You have a lot of different organizational units and different companies, and they may not all fall into a CMDB or a traditional asset management platform like an agent-based solution can cover. So when we built out our security strategy, it was really important to make sure we understood that we had all of our assets covered, not just the assets that we were aware of, both from an exposure perspective, meaning things available or exposed to the public internet, which obviously improves the ability for someone to try to compromise it, as well as many companies are investing in the cloud and moving more and more applications either to a SaaS-based application or a public cloud infrastructure and moving away from a traditional data center. This is an easy target as well, because a lot of those organizations don't have traditional security set up. They may be doing more cloud native services, or they may be working across multiple clouds, depending on the part of the organization or the geography they're in. So this is where the cloud security then overlaps with some of your exposure management and your vulnerability management, because the cloud's going to continue to grow and there's no real stock there. It's going to keep being easier for developers and applications to get deployed with a cloud first mentality. And if you don't have your exposure management strategy to cover that, then you're really leaving gaps in what you have available. If you go to the next slide.
And by the way, just before we continue, I could not agree more. And that's something I always extremely appreciated in our conversations about it, in terms of, thinking where the attack's actually coming from. How do I make sure that I got this stuff covered? What process or technology or mechanism do I have in place as a safety net or what have you, to make sure that all of this is actually working?
Yeah, but like the most common question a security practitioner is going to get from a C-suite or maybe an external auditor is, how do you know your company is protected? How do you know that the systems that are running your business operations are secure? And obviously, that's overly simplified in a non-technical description. But then when you translate that to a very technical implementation, it's how can I have a solution like a CyCognito that can tell me what is exposed from an asset perspective, not just my known assets, but all the discoverable assets from the attacker mentality and what they see so that I can help defend it better. But then also, like the diagram shows on the right, you have all of these different cloud native developments taking place, some of which are on traditional virtual machines, some of which are on cloud native services, some of which are container based, making it even more difficult for the traditional security practitioner. That then now you really need to adjust the the kind of old school mentality of how do you identify vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, insecure practices, and really take a more modern day look at how do I find all these things, and then how do I prioritize what I'm going to fix. The easiest rule is prioritize things that have an external exposure to them as your top priority. Again, back to the hacker mentality of, well, that's where they're going to look first. There's no reason for them to try to compromise your VPN, your firewall, your private network, if they can just go from the front door that's exposed on the public internet.
Yeah, path of least resistance.
Yeah. That's the easiest hack.
Yeah, 100%.
And what I think is really nice is we see a lot of tools in the security portfolio. You see a lot of different point solutions, but the difficulty there is, as a security practitioner, trying to get a lot of point solutions to work well together to help you understand really what is your attack surface and how do you prioritize. So I think the diagram also shows very well how when security solutions integrate well together, you can get a much better benefit because you're not just looking at one lens of the vulnerability or one lens of the exposure, but you can see both sides together.
Could not agree more. Bandhna, moving to you.
Thank you. And yeah, I think that tees it up well to, talk a little bit about what Wiz is as a platform, and the key word there being Wiz being a platform. We have native scanners that are scanning your software development lifecycle and have prioritized findings with context to let teams resolve those prioritized findings when we share those with other platforms. And so at Wiz, what we've seen is that our software development lifecycle overall for organizations, it's shifted quite a bit with the migration to the cloud. Now we're seeing that when companies think about development, it's moved from a waterfall to an agile and continuous manner. You have your developers coding in their IDEs, they're pushing it to their CI/CD pipelines, and then running it on their cloud environment and monitoring that at the runtime layer. And all of that's being done at a very fast pace. And from the attacker's perspective, they're thinking about it the same way. They're not caring for org structures or the SDLC process. They're looking for an open door and to move laterally to get access to sensitive data. And so going to the next slide, we're seeing that within security, however, we still have these silos. We have our AppSec teams running native SaaS scanners and code scanners on their own. You have DevSecOps teams running scans in their pipeline, cloud security teams that are running their own cloud set of scanners, your CSPM scanners. And then at the runtime layer, you have your SecOps teams running their own EDM solutions. And so if we jump to the next slide, we're seeing that these duplicate findings at each different layer, they're resulting in a siloed approach, and that's creating friction between your development teams and your security teams. And that's leaving teams struggling to identify ownership and prioritize findings on what's actually important to remediate that would lead to a potential breach. What's exploitable in their environment and what should they focus on versus looking at duplicate findings across their entire software development lifecycle and not really knowing where to start. And so on the next slide, we see how Wiz helps resolve that, coming in with one platform and really enabling your security organizations to look at your cloud applications horizontally, just like the attacker's point of view, and to work better with your development teams and move at the same pace of the business. And so with Wiz, we have one shared graph, our security graph, that's mapping this from your code to cloud to runtime layer. We're taking a unified approach to scanning to understand your context across this lifecycle and then prioritization for all the teams that need it. And so here we have 3 different products that are covering those 3 pillars. You have your risk and cloud infrastructure with Wiz Cloud, you have your runtime with Wiz Defend, and then code security with Wiz Code. And all of those are connected in a single solution and a single set of policies in context. And Wiz Cloud is really what's at the core of this, giving your organizations complete visibility without agents, and then prioritizing the most critical item that will make the most improvement in your security posture. So collaboration between your developers and security teams to reduce your critical risk. And that's actually why we see 50% of our users are actually on the development side who sit outside of security and not our security teams, which I think is pretty unique for a security platform. And so once you've looked at your most critical item with Wiz Cloud and got that complete visibility, then you can think about shifting left once your running environment's under control. And that's where Wiz Code will come in. It's letting you scan from your code to cloud and ensuring that you're applying your guardrails across the pipeline. And then Wiz Defend is coming in for your real-time monitoring and defense against your threats, because you can't fix everything in the cloud. And that's where we're ingesting logs and then using a lightweight sensor where we have to get signals on the process level on VMs, really our reactive approach here. So taking that code to cloud to runtime model where we're doing root cause analysis and detection and response all in one unified platform with one unified scanning engine. So now let's look at how this fits together with CyCognito on the next slide. How we join together to really be better for our customers. So on the Wiz side, we're seeing that Wiz is scanning your cloud environments agentlessly. We're building an inventory of your cloud estate, discovering your toxic combinations of risk, which is what we call issues. And then we're showing that on our security graph to help visualize how those workloads and components are coming together to create an attack path that could cause a potential breach for your organization. And we're continuously doing that discovery for misconfigurations, validating that at the runtime layer for internet exposure, and then giving you a prioritized view of your risks to fit with context so that as a customer, you have what you need to fix them and know what to tackle first. Then on the CyCognito side, they're taking in the cloud and runtime context that Wiz has at the code, cloud, and runtime layer, and then performing external testing on that inventory, including, scanning outside in for any exposure on that front, and then sending those DAST findings back to Wiz to be connected on our security graph as findings. And that's allowing our customers to have a more enhanced and richer context to take faster, more informed remediation decisions by enriching our existing graph and context that we pull in with additional insights from CyCognito.
That's great. So shifting to another perspective on all of this, and I 1000% agree with what you just said, Bandhna. So CyCognito, as many folks know, are about external exposure management, and we started the company. We now serve more than 20 of the Global 100. We started the company with this mission, to Alex's point, of identifying these paths of least resistance into the organization's networks and key assets. And since day one and even today, the business key insight about this is that you cannot do it if you don't have visibility and a discovery or reconnaissance process that can identify blind spots. Meaning, if I rely on known IP range and agent deployments and API hooks and what have you, by definition, I'll have some blind spots. And by definition, risk will accumulate where I'm not looking. So I can do an amazing job over here, and then even if it's 5%, 3%, sometimes it's 30% that I don't see over here, that's where most of my exploitable risk will accumulate. And we love numbers. So when you try to quantify that, and this is a framework that Alex has contributed to, when you think about numbers, some aspects worth considering are, for example, what percentage of my subsidiaries and actual networks have the security controls I believe in. Maybe I have the best controls, best people, best processes. How many of them are actually in place and are working? And then the other big aspect that I think the industry is starting to put much more focus on in the last couple of years, and more is needed, I believe, is the coverage and cadence of penetration testing, DAST, and call it production testing. So I can have, again, all of the best pen testers, the best red team, but what percentage of the thousands of websites I have that are exposed to the internet, including even DevOps today and AI resources, what have you, to Bandhna's point, what percentage of them are actually being tested by my amazing pen testing red team PT provider? And is it just annual? Is it just quarterly on those assets? And then, of course, it all comes down to the MTTR on what I define as critical. Where today attacks, as we all know, take just hours or days to happen since a new vulnerability is published or known, or the exploits are, versus, I would carefully say, 6 months maybe, or months in any case, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So it's all accelerating, and AI is accelerating that too. With regard to the 1 + 1 = 11 of the CyCognito and Wiz story, it's really about the combination of discovering the blind spots, correlating what real attackers from the outside in see using autonomous seedless reconnaissance techniques CyCognito runs. You correlate that, we correlate that with the Wiz data where Wiz is deployed. And the first huge value is identifying these environments or subsidiaries where might not be covered today for either business and budget reasons or just blind spots, which can happen obviously in every organization for various reasons. And as I mentioned earlier, risk accumulates where you're not looking. So Wiz is doing an amazing job at everything they do, and what Bandhna covered. The question is, do you have some environment, some subsidiaries, an acquisition that happened at some point that might not be covered or not in the same way? And is it more likely to be at risk or less? The answer is pretty obvious. So that's one big portion of that value prop. The second big portion of the value prop is the autonomous external security testing and black box pen testing, if you will, CyCognito drives, especially around dynamic application security testing on live production websites in the tens of thousands at some companies, and pen testing modules, where we have 90,000 of them overall across DAST vulnerability scanning and pure pen testing. So that all flows to the Wiz platform. So many folks, as Alex mentioned, are focused on holistic exposure management. How do I prioritize, ideally, all of my vulnerabilities on a single platform, single view, with a rational, business-oriented, and attacker-aware, speaking of the paths of least resistance, process. And ideally, which is what we're seeing, I want that number, the number of criticals or paths of least resistance, to be in the 3, 5, 10, 20. That's how you can tell that it's actually working, versus if you're looking at thousands, not to mention hundreds of thousands of criticals at large enterprises, there is very little you can do about that in that position. Just before we move to Q&A, any other quick comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I would say here, I think CyCognito and Wiz are really coming in to better serve the customers here, right? You're getting your workload, identity, configuration, runtime context from Wiz, but you're having all of that enriched with that black box text testing that CyCognito is doing, so that you have a full holistic approach, like Rob and Alex were mentioning, of what that view is of what's actually exploitable in your environment. And if you have hundreds of critical issues, which one should you prioritize first, right? With all of that context coming in, Wiz is then able to give you that better answer. And with CyCognito's validation of that, with that testing approach.
Completely agree. All right. So with that, we can move to the Q&A portion, and I think we have a few already. Carla?
Okay, so great. I think we covered a lot of really interesting ground. Got a few really interesting questions for all of you. So first one, how does the Wiz and CyCognito partnership fit into the bigger picture of your organization's cloud security strategy? Rob, Bandhna, that would be great if you could, answer that one.
Bandhna, do you want to go first?
Yeah, happy to start. I think the partnership, it's really reflecting our broader cloud security strategy together, about giving customers that complete visibility across both their managed and their unmanaged environment. Wiz is focusing really deeply on what's inside of your cloud, your workloads, your identities, your configurations, and your runtime risks. And then CyCognito is extending that lens outward to discover what's externally exposed, even if it's outside of your known cloud footprint. And then together, they're coming together to close that loop between your internal and your external risks. So, which is exactly where cloud security is headed, towards unified visibility and intelligent prioritization to help organizations actually reduce their exposure rather than just monitor it.
Yeah, couldn't put it any better, so I won't. But I will maybe add one thing, which is acquisitions and third-party assets is another area, and third-party entities are another area of great concern, where the connection between CyCognito and Wiz, where Wiz is deployed, where you control your assets and environments, but the additional perspective of what are some even third-party assets, like this application or marketing campaign, what have you, that is collecting PII. It's exploitable maybe. Maybe it's leading to your cloud assets. What are these attack paths? So makes so much sense, and we're very excited about it.
Okay, so that's great. Next question. Alex, can you answer, what role does executive leadership play in driving adoption of these kind of integrations?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think it was mentioned earlier, one of the things we like a lot about Wiz is it's not a security tool, right? Most of the security tools are intended for security practitioners to use. So obviously the security team can use the tool, but you're going to get much more actionable results when you put the tool in the hands of the developer, you put the tool in the hands of the cloud team who are responsible for the infrastructure. A lot of times the security practitioner can just recommend what change they want made or what configuration they want adjusted. What we've been using Wiz for is, hey, this is a great communication mechanism to say, this is what we want you to do, and here's the steps to do it. Go into the console, look at it yourself. We don't have to police everything. We can use it as really the work list. And I think one of the cool things, Wiz has like a zero critical club. So they're trying to get companies to say, okay, can you get rid of all your critical issues? That's an easy thing to convey to a developer or to a cloud infrastructure specialist, where obviously security people have been doing vulnerability management and issue management for years, right? That's a good communication mechanism. And then when we add CyCognito on top of that to say, hey, now this is really helping you understand what the vulnerability is, what has been tested, what can be seen outside. Here's the CVE that they tested and confirmed, and here's the associated infrastructure in Wiz. Go click on it in the console, and now you can go remediate it. That makes the whole process move a lot quicker and then you can report back to senior leaders, hey, your teams have the tools they need to action them. We're also prioritizing what we want them to work on first. And we made a very clear path to say everything that's critical, everything that's exposed to the public internet needs to be actioned in a timely manner, because that's what's going to be hit first from an attacker mentality.
Great.
Thank you. That's great. Next question. How do you see the relationship between external and internal visibility evolving in the next generation of security platforms? Rob, over to you.
Yes, happy to take that. I would say that we're seeing, so I like to split solutions in exposure management to outside in and inside out, in terms of, does this solution, when it works well, does it require deployments, API hooks, anything like that? Or is it completely black box, represents attacker's perspective, and doesn't require, ideally, any kind of input or integration to do what it's supposed to do? And absolutely, you need both, right? Now, the interesting thing is, the inside-out perspective is one where you have tons of context. Because you're inside, you can use whatever API calls you want to, say, AWS, what have you. So we're seeing technologies in terms of the future, better contextualizing assets, risk. We're seeing more and more, there aren't many, unfortunately, for the industry, but Wiz, for example, is doing a tremendous job with the graph data modeling of what they're providing to you, which are things you can do from the inside out. On the outside in, I would say that as an industry, the blind spots is still a big problem, and with AI, we're seeing more and more random engineers creating random, fun, useful things for them and some of their colleagues, but it creates risks that are harder to manage in many cases, especially at large enterprises, or if you don't have tight control of absolutely everything. So in terms of the future, we're seeing, I believe, we'll see more and more internal or inside out, outside in perspectives better connect, like what we've done here, which I haven't seen anywhere before. Like being able to say, here are the literally 3 attack paths that start from an external cloud asset VPN application and is leading to these internal cloud environment. And here's the vulnerability, here's the exploit, here's the evidence on the attack path in, and here's what happens in terms of blast radius if and once that happens. That hasn't happened before. I think that as an industry, we're starting to talk about this concept over the last few years. I think that only now it's starting to become available in a few areas, and it's definitely something that I'm a huge believer in, and we're investing in. Alex has been an amazing partner on helping us brainstorm and ideate on what that future looks like too, which I highly appreciate. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. So what do you think's next for integrations like this? Are we moving towards one unified security platform, would you say?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think with Wiz, our focus right now is on developing and delivering the best possible visibility and security for cloud workloads. That's been our core strength, and we rely heavily on our partners and integrations like CyCognito to extend that visibility, whether that's on external exposure, identity, or runtime protection. And I think the future itself, it's about connected intelligence, where our integrations are bringing the best capability together, and a unified ecosystem where that context is flowing seamlessly between solutions so teams can make faster, smarter decisions. I don't necessarily think one unified platform is the overall approach to that. I think every partner and every integration has their own strengths that they bring together, and that together it can create exactly the kind of visibility and approach that organizations need. But I think one unified platform in and of itself can't cover with its own kind of development and power exactly every single use case and changes that we're seeing in our threat landscape as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that many risk leaders, and Alex, feel free to chime in a second, many risk leaders are asking themselves, so I have this set of problems and priorities, and in a sense, it's much easier if you can have one platform that does everything well enough, not to mention great. There are many pros in that, obviously. The challenge is that there's no one platform that is great at more than one or two areas. And then there is this super interesting conversation these days of one platform versus best in suite, to Bandhna's point. So for example, if you care about cloud security, you should consider working with Wiz. If you believe in the importance of outside-in perspective and having a capability that identifies real blind spots and not just asking you, hey, what are your IP ranges, and we'll do something about that, then you should probably talk to CyCognito. And so I think that's the near-term future, the next 3 to 5 years future, at least, for better or for worse. And then that's why it's so important that, and you can't do that with everyone or everywhere, but why key leaders should probably do these kind of integrations and partnerships so that bigger, important problems can be better solved. And at the end of the day, it's a question of how easy it is to deploy, how easy it is to operate. Is it delivering much more value the better together that suite? And is it easy to get there? Alex, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, and from the security practitioner perspective, right? We want it easy. We want a simpler user experience. You have junior analysts, you have senior analysts, you have engineers, you have lots of different people in your organization. The one thing they all want is an easy to use tool. They don't want to have to spend 6 months learning how to use the tool to be able to take action. They want to be able to, log in, have an intuitive interface, click a couple things, fix an issue, and go on to the next one, right? Then, that's the ultimate end state. So I think, security practitioners are getting very picky these days. The security tools are getting more mature, the security ecosystems consolidating. You're seeing the security practitioners saying, hey, we won't accept a hard to use tool anymore. We won't accept that we have to learn some complex language to be able to make queries on a tool. Everybody wants everything natural language based, LLM based. They want to be able to auto remediate with one push button. So I think a lot of us as users of these tools are saying, hey, we're expecting more from the vendors, and a lot of the time it's really getting the vendors to work well. The security ecosystem already works well together. I think we're just pushing even harder to say we want all the solutions to be integrated well together so that we don't have to do such a hard job of integrating solution X with solution Y with solution Z.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really focused on collaboration in the future. I think we already have a sort of unified platform approach with tools like Wiz, and then adding the power that these integrations bring on top of that and eliminating the friction that teams have to deal with or had dealt with looking at different tools for all of their different findings. I think bringing together collaboration into that unified ecosystem is exactly what our teams need to be effective.
Mm-hmm. And maybe the one last thing I'll share about this, it's a very long answer from all of us about these very critical questions, though, so I think it's a good use of everyone's time. But the one last thing I'll add is I always go back to how do I quantify it? Like number of criticals is one important way to discuss it, mean time to remediation. And then the one element, as I mentioned earlier, I think that the industry will massively benefit from spending some more time thinking about is the coverage element. whatever I trust, where is that deploy, and how do I manage my scarce resources, to Alex's point, on the overall ROI? Like, is it better to spend $1 million just making this app on pen testing 5% or 3% of the websites exposed to the internet? Or should I distribute that differently so there are a bunch of important things I do on everything continuously, and then of course go deep in the important areas? But this kind of thinking, I think, is extremely important and something that more and more leaders are starting to put more attention into, which is also the way maybe to consider when a big vendor says, oh, I'm doing all of these things and I can consolidate everything in this area, which is very tempting, and it makes some business sense in some regard. But then you want to ask yourself, what am I losing? What do I know that I will not have visibility into, I will not be able to do? How do such KPIs on MTTR, blah, 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 will be reduced or not improved?
Okay, so we have a question come in around on AI. So AI is expanding how organizations build and deploy systems. How is it also expanding their attack surface? And what new blind spots are you seeing because of it?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think AI, that's the hot topic nowadays, right? Everyone's using it in some sort of way. It's transforming how our teams are building and deploying systems, but it's also introducing a new layer of risk with that because it's so new. And we're seeing organizations spin up these AI services, APIs, and model endpoints faster than security teams can track them. And that means new exposure like misconfigured AI storage, unmonitored data flows, and shadow AI as well that never really go through a standard review process. And I think the biggest blind spot right now is visibility towards that. Security teams, they don't often know where their AI components live, what data they're touching, or how they're interacting with other services. And that's why, together with the Wiz platform, we're focused on giving customers that full stack AI visibility from code to model to runtime so that they can actually see and secure the AI systems that are driving their business. And we're also using our Wiz lenses approach, where we have a customized view of the Wiz platform for each persona. So your AI security team can look at exactly the findings that matter to them and the risk exposed at the AI level, instead of just, your entire security issues across your enterprise. So in a few different ways, helping to remediate that blind spot of visibility and then connecting all of that onto our security graph so you can see how all of that fits together.
Agree. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the only thing I would add to that point is it's really important, more so than ever, but I think it was always important, to give developers, and some of these now are, I would say, a junior developer who are primarily using AI, LLM, vibe coding to generate some source code, to give them a tool that's easy to use at the time of development, that they can fix the code, find the vulnerability, find the misconfiguration, find the outdated library, before it ever even gets to the point where CyCognito will see it on the exposure or on the deployment. So, I think that's one of the key maybe differentiators is, and we've all heard everyone say shift left, but this is really a good example to say there's an opportunity here to really get your protection in, or get your identification in before it gets deployed to the cloud, before it gets exposed to the internet. That way, then you don't have anything to remediate. So that you're giving the developer AI tools to make it easier for them to develop. You shouldn't just give them development tools. You have to give them security tools along with development tools that then make their deployments better.
Agree. This is an area, but so I think I 1000% agree. You always want to start from what process and infrastructure can I put in place to prevent, ideally, 99% of the problems in the first place. And then in terms of how do you identify the 1%, 5%, what have you, of random errors that are creating random problematic exposures, I can share that CyCognito is now one of our big research projects, which is developing well, is how do you identify AI-related resources, not just applications, which is easier, also not something that is well done in the industry right now, but how do you identify even resources and environments that seem to be related to AI application development, where there might be training data and certain databases, data sets that are extremely sensitive, that might impact your whole revenue and business using various heuristics. So you absolutely want to start from process and infrastructure and preventing these kind of things from happening. But we have seen even this, for example, Fortune 100 financial services company accidentally exposing this tiny log file on some cloud asset, which exposed dozens of MySQL credentials of their own company. And by the way, speaking of third-party risk, some of their customers. So you definitely want to have both layers of defense or approaches. And with AI, just more random things can happen.
I think we might just have time for one more question. Let's just come in. Okay, so we've talked a lot about visibility and testing. How does this partnership help security leaders move from just identifying risks to truly reducing overall exposure?
And maybe I'll start, and then I'll hand it over to you guys. As a security leader, I think the Wiz slide was a good example where you don't want these silos. So you don't want your vulnerability management team saying, this is the most important vulnerability, let's go fix it. And then you go over to your cloud team and they say, no, this is the most important vulnerability. And then as a security leader, you're struggling to figure out how to prioritize. So, I think the better together story here is really is helping merge those data sets to help you understand what is your priority as a security leader to fix. Because in reality, you only have a fixed set of resources, and you can only work from the top down. So, work from your highest exposure, highest vulnerability, close that, and then rinse and repeat over and over. I think that's really what we're looking at from a security leader perspective.
Agree. And maybe the one thing I add before we have to wrap up is the testing coverage I can share is a missing puzzle piece in many models, because if you're seeing the assets and you have the software versions of what's deployed there, for example, but you can't tell what are the handful of things that, say, external attackers where 82% of the attacks are coming from, where they can actually get, or what's truly exploitable. You're trying to exploit everything, and then you have the small amount of things that are actually exploitable. That's a missing puzzle piece in many frameworks, processes, steps to get to the handful of things you have to focus on. So that's been a very powerful learning from the last couple of years. Caroline, back to you.
Thank you so much. I'd just like to thank you all for an amazing session. Bandhna, Alex, Rob, for joining us today. Really, thank you very much. And how Colgate-Palmolive works cloud exposure magic with Wiz and CyCognito. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. It was great.
Thanks, everyone.